speaking of creating money out of thin air, we have here's an example of the U.S. debt clock, and that there's an infinite amount of cash and an infinite amount of debt. If you're to go back in time here, say just to the year 2000, you see the U.S. national debt was roughly $5 trillion. And, if you lurch forward to today, to 2022, it's well over $30 trillion. And this is, the important thing here is that this is not an increase of $26 trillion, but instead this is an increase of 6x. And so, if you continue this math out for any duration of time, the math only gets scarier the farther you go out. So the same thing's true with stocks. The same thing's true with gold. We're always going to be able to discover more gold. Just earlier this year, in July of 2022, we discovered 31 million more tons of gold at least.
Now let me say this. Let me stop it right here. Full disclosure, I don't believe that story about the gold found in Uganda and all those tons of gold. I think that was BS. I think that's been debunked. But let me know in the comment section what you think about that. But with that being said, though, I do believe there is more gold out there than what we know. You know what I mean? He's going to talk about that later, but I definitely don't believe in this story.
And this is going to impact the gold market, because when you issue more gold over time, you dilute the supply. You basically have an energy loss in the system, that if you own a bar of gold, that bar of gold is going to lose energy over time, because there's always new issuance coming onto the market. As technology gets better, we find more gold, we are more efficient in refining gold, and eventually we get to ludicrous things, or at least by today's standards, of eventually mining asteroids. People think that, we're just limited to Earth. Well, what happens in the future? Not anywhere in the near future, but basically there's an infinite amount of resources in space, at least infinite in human scale. If we're never going to run out of gold, we're never going to run out of water, we're never going to run out of these things. If the market is demanding these things, we're going to find a way that is economically viable to gain more materials. We can go out to other asteroids or planets or the moon or whatever and get as much as we want, or look inwards to Earth and find more effective ways to refine our resources on Earth.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about earlier. But let me say this. Precious metals are outstanding. This is God's money. I absolutely love it. In comparison to fiat currency, precious metals is much more finite and a much greater store of value. We know that. This is why we stack, ladies and gentlemen. But with that being said, I have to agree with what he said about the technology. There are precious metals in places that we have not been yet or discovered.
Having that immutable, perfect scarcity that you talked about is just an absolute game changer in my mind, because people have historically thought of gold as being a scarce asset, but when something is increasing its supply at roughly maybe 2% per year estimated, that's still exponential growth on a long enough time horizon. So if you take that assumption and you say, okay, how much gold was available back in the year 1800 or 1820 or something like that, there was actually more gold mined in the year 2022 if you take the 2% annualized supply growth assumption. There's actually more gold mined in the year 2022 than there was gold that existed in the world that was mined from eternity to the year 1800, which is pretty crazy. So
that's insane to think about. That is insane to think about.
Yeah.
In one year, we've got, and this is the thing, gold goes back 2,000 years more in history. They've produced it for probably maybe 10,000 years, take your pick. And then since 1850, we now do it more than was in that whole 2,000 year period. In 1 year, we produce more. That's a wild thought. People get lost on it.
Exactly. And comparing that to Bitcoin, it's so obvious, but it's funny that people think of gold as just being this perfectly scarce asset, when in reality, that's completely not the case.
I don't know if you ever watched Road to Ruda's channel. He said there's gold in Mount Everest. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but there are a lot of metals in the sea. There are a lot of metals in the asteroid belt. There may be metals on the moon. There are metals in the other planets around our solar system. Heck, there may be a little small meteorite or asteroid or whatever it is that hit the Earth and have a lot of precious metals on it. If that happens, what's going to happen to precious metal prices. It's going to go down, because precious metals are precious because they're rare. And if that happens, not saying it will, but if that happens, that'll definitely increase the supply and decrease the demand. But this is why I have this stuff you see here, man. Not just regular silver. I got stuff that they ain't making anymore. They're not making Inglehards anymore. They're not making Johnson Mattheys. They're not making pre-1964 constitutional silver. They're not making 1996 silver eagles. You know what I mean? This is why I stack this kind of silver.
Or take this, for example, humanoid robots. We think that there are labor shortages, and we think that there's a scarcity of labor, where in reality, the future that's coming, there's going to be only more and more kinds of labor. There are only going to be more people as the population continues to grow over the coming decades and centuries. And yeah, that might ebb and flow, especially on the region, but there's always going to be more people. There's always going to be more labor. The human population has been exponential for thousands of years now at this point, and the same thing is true with robots. What if, say in a quarter to half a century or so, we're able to have humanoid robots that we can just make tens of millions, hundreds of millions of them, and add them to the workforce. There's an infinite amount of labor that's possible, and we're able to do that because there's an infinite amount of materials to create said robots, and there's an infinite amount of intelligence that can be plugged into those robots, because now not only do we have the intelligence of humans, but we're on the verge of artificial intelligence becoming only more common across the entire world. So there's an infinite amount of intelligence, an infinite amount of labor, and our energy consumption continues towards infinity. We discover more and more ways to create energy, and all these forms of energy become more efficient. We find more raw materials, and this, even though this looks flat over here to the left, it actually continues its exponential trend all the way out for hundreds of years and even millennia. We continue to get better, and this is only going to be dwarfed by a factor of 10, a factor of 50, a factor of 100 in the future. We can't even understand it. In the same way that a civilization that slaughters whales in order to oil their lamps to light their homes can't imagine that everyone would use light bulbs, because to them light bulbs are so expensive and so impractical and so unbelievably energy intensive by their standards. Today we use light bulbs, we leave them on at night, we don't even think about it. And in the same regard, things today that are extremely energy intensive, that seem mind-blowing to us, will become normal and commonplace for people in the future. This is just the way technology works.
That is very, very true. Just in my lifetime, things have changed. And when he brought up the AI thing, it's crazy, because I watched a video today that absolutely blew my mind. Check this out.
Let's go ahead and interview Faux Brian. Brian, does journalism have a future?
Absolutely, Brian. Journalism and media play a critical role in providing information and keeping the public informed. While the industry has faced disruption and challenges with the rise of digital media and social platforms, there will always be a demand for quality journalism and storytelling. Adapting to changes in technology and audience behavior will be key to a sustainable future for journalism. But I believe that the fundamental importance of journalism in society will never change. What are your thoughts on the future of journalism?
Okay, that is absolutely stunning. Is artificial intelligence going to be good for humanity, or is it, Faux Brian, a threat to humanity?
That's a great question, Brian. Artificial intelligence has the potential to improve our lives in many ways, from enhancing healthcare and transportation systems to optimizing business operations and saving energy. However, it's also important to acknowledge the potential risks and challenges associated with AI, such as job displacement and privacy concerns. As with any technological advancement, it's essential to approach AI with caution and consider its impact on society as a whole. By working towards responsible development and deployment of AI, we can harness its benefits while mitigating its risks.
What is the greatest movie ever made?
Well, Brian, that's a difficult question. There are so many incredible movies out there, each with its own unique qualities and appeal. It can be tough to choose just one as the greatest ever made. However, some films have stood the test of time and continue to captivate audiences to this day. Classics like The Godfather, Gone with the Wind, and Casablanca are often regarded as some of the greatest films ever made in cinematic history. Other modern films such as The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, The Shawshank Redemption, and Forrest Gump have also gained widespread critical acclaim and cultural significance. Ultimately, the greatest movie ever made could vary based on personal preferences and individual experiences. What's your favorite movie, Brian?
My favorite movie is The Right Stuff, based on the Tom Wolfe book, the true story about the Mercury astronauts and General Chuck Yeager. What are the 3 most interesting countries to visit in the world right now?
The Right Stuff is a great movie, Brian. As for your question, there are so many incredible countries to visit in the world, each with its own unique culture, history, and attractions. Here are 3 countries that I find particularly interesting to visit right now. 1, Japan. Japan is a fascinating blend of ancient traditions and modern technology, offering visitors a unique experience like no other. From the bustling streets of Tokyo to the serene temples of Kyoto, Japan has something for everyone. 2, Egypt. For history and archaeology enthusiasts, Egypt is a must-visit destination. The country's rich ancient civilization is showcased through iconic landmarks like the pyramids of Giza and the temples of Luxor and Karnak. 3, New Zealand. Nature lovers will enjoy the breathtaking landscapes of New Zealand, from snow-capped mountains and glaciers to serene lakes and beaches. The country is also known for its outdoor activities, such as hiking, skiing, and water sports. Of course, there are countless other amazing countries to consider visiting as well, depending on your interests and preferences.
Japan is actually number 1 on my list of places to visit. I've been to Egypt. It is spectacular. Nailed it with Japan. Final question, Faux Brian. If you are flying economy class internationally, is it polite to fully recline your seat into the person's space behind you?
Japan is definitely a must-visit destination, Brian. As for your question, it's a bit of a sticky situation. While you do have the right to recline your seat on an airplane, it's always considerate to be mindful of the person behind you. If you're planning on reclining, it's a good idea to do so gradually and check with the person behind you if they're comfortable. It's also courteous to avoid reclining during meal times or when the person behind you is working on a laptop or other device. Ultimately, being respectful and considerate to your fellow passengers is always the best approach when flying economy class internationally.
Nailed it. Absolutely amazing. Faux Brian, thank you. John Mayer, I'm going to bring you in. Listen, I probably would answer a little more like, with a little more inflection and humor, but nailed it on Japan. I find it very, where does this go in 3 years? What is, if we do this again in 3 years, what's it going to sound or look like?
Well, in 3 years, what happens with this is because of how immersive this is, what we've seen in our beta testing, which we've made public over the last few weeks, is that these users become intimately, almost attached to these personas to the point where they're friends with them. So in 3 years, I think the future looks like having these sort of AI persona companions in your pocket that you learn from, grow with, and, explore the world with. I think it's an entirely new way of communicating, in this case, with a new form of, in some cases, life.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Jonathan, thank you. Forever Voices. I could see it hurting a company like a Google where you don't need to search for something. You just say, hey, me, what are the top 3 restaurants near me? What would I like the most where I'm standing right now? I think it's amazing. Jonathan Meyer, really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Forever Voices. That was really interesting, right? I mean, yeah, a little bit robotic on the answers, but wow.
And what's crazy about that is, like you said, in 3 years, what it's going to be. Imagine telling yourself when you were younger that we're going to have all this stuff that we have now. Not even that AI stuff we just saw, but what we have. I mean, that was incredible, wasn't it? Can you imagine somebody doing that to you? Did he sound a little robotic? Yeah, not really. But if I didn't know that was an AI, I wouldn't have known. Crazy. It was absolutely, man, it's just mind-blowing, the things that we don't know. But when we're stuck in this paradigm, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what we don't know. It's crazy, man. But anyways, this chart right here they're getting ready to show is very, very important. I want you to pay close attention to this.
Over time. But compare that to Bitcoin, where this red line here is its supply. And so over the first 140 years of its existence, the new issuance of supply will decrease by 50% every 210,000 blocks, roughly 4 years, because every block is 10 minutes long. But basically what we have here is a finite system. It is a closed loop. It retains its supply. It cannot increase no matter how much energy we throw at it, no matter how many computers we throw at it. It is designed to only have 21 million Bitcoin. It's designed to have a finite system. It is a closed system in a world of open systems.
This is that chart right there. Just imagine it said precious metals or gold or silver or something like that. And we knew exactly how many ounces of silver there were in the ground. We knew exactly how many ounces were in the vaults and things like that. That's the original reason why I started stacking precious metals. You know what I mean? Because it's so finite in comparison to the dollar, and still is, of course. But when you compare it to Bitcoin, and we know exactly every single Satoshi that's being mined at what time and how many long and how far out, that is the true definition of finite. And in comparison, I hate to say this, but precious metals are, it pales in comparison to Bitcoin as far as being finite.
And so this sounds insane to say that everything is going to zero. against Bitcoin, but the basic metaphor here is to compare oxygen versus the Mona Lisa. This is something that I think is a good metaphor to explain here. Oxygen is the most valuable thing we have. It's more valuable than water. It's more valuable than food. It's more valuable than your health. You know, obviously without water and food, you're going to die. But without oxygen, you'll be dead in a matter of minutes. You know, it is the most urgent thing that we need all day, every day, even when we are sleeping. But it's free. Nobody charges for oxygen, and the reason it's free is because its supply is infinite. Even though oxygen is the most valuable thing for our survival, it is free, and nobody charges for it because its supply is infinite. Yes, demand is important, but supply is far more important in this example. Where compare it to the Mona Lisa, you don't need it to survive. You're not going to die if you don't see it, if you don't have it beside you every single day. Obviously, this is laughable. Yet everyone pays to see it. I've seen the Mona Lisa myself, and you know it's amazing. You have this massive horde of people all taking pictures of it, who have all paid exorbitant amounts of money to fly there, or take a train there, or walk there, and pay their entrance ticket, and be able to see it and take a picture of it, or to look at it. Everyone pays to see the Mona Lisa, even though nobody needs it to survive, and yet nobody thinks about the oxygen they're breathing, because we all take it for granted because the supply is infinite. And so if we were to think, for example, of pricing the Mona Lisa in oxygen, its price would trend towards infinity. You know, say we lived in a world where, you know, specific units of oxygen were our form of currency, the price, or the quote-unquote value of the Mona Lisa, would trend towards infinity, because we have an endless amount of the resource. We have an endless amount of the underlying currency, the underlying form of value here. And so basically, again, if you want to think of it from a physics or an engineering perspective, if you divide an open system by a closed system, you get an infinite price. Okay, let me emphasize that again. If you divide an open system by a closed system, you get an infinite price. If you divide the Mona Lisa, where there's only one, a fixed amount of Mona Lisa, versus oxygen, an infinite amount, you get an infinite price. Okay, and so if you divide an infinite amount of cash, an infinite amount of energy, and paper equity, and bonds, and stocks, and everything else, if you divide all these infinite things by a closed system, and specifically a closed system of computers and a proof of work consensus mechanism, where it is a finite system and where nothing is created out of thin air, no energy is created or destroyed, it's simply transferred from electrical energy to computational energy into digital energy. That again is a finite system, a closed system. That system's value trends towards infinity. It is incredibly hard for people to understand this, but basically the metaphor clearly here is that Bitcoin is the proverbial Mona Lisa, while everything else is trending towards oxygen over time. Even though we need all this prosperity, we need all these things, when you have an infinite supply, it is just going to increase in abundance over time, and its value in relation to the scarce thing is going to decline forever. And so basically the way to put it, and why Bitcoin matters for the average person, is that to not own Bitcoin in the future will be like trying to sell your neighbors bottles of oxygen to get by. It's like, yes, they need it, and yes, they need it to live, but it's so abundant, it's so cheap, and there's so much prosperity that you're not going to be able to sell it, because the marginal cost of energy has gone to zero, and there's abundant everything. What is there left to sell? Well, you need something that is scarce. You need something that is outside human control. You need something in order. You need something there to be able to price all these things in. And so basically people look backwards and think it's absurd people will look back and think it's absurd that we'll have a mixed portfolio of consumer goods and equity that goes to zero. In the same way that it sounds absurd of selling oxygen to your neighbor today, it will sound absurd that we used to hold our houses and stocks and companies and all these things as things that would go up and trend up with time, because in this future world, all these things will just go down towards zero over time.
If you didn't understand that analogy, watch it again. If you didn't understand that, go back and watch it. He's basically saying Bitcoin's the Mona Lisa. You know what I mean? It's only one of them. You know what I mean? And everything else, like he said in that little chart when he showed all the things we need, the stocks, the bonds, the this, the that, all these things are abundance. Yeah, we need all those things. We need water. We need these things. But just like oxygen, it all can be created. It rains. food is in abundance. We're always growing plants. We're always growing animals and stuff like that. All that stuff is in abundance. But when we got Bitcoin, my God, it pales in comparison. I made a analogy the other day. And I'm gonna stick with it. And I love my precious metals, but when you're a precious metal stacker, it's like being in middle school or high school. But when you start stacking Bitcoin and learn about Bitcoin, that's like getting a college or a doctorate degree, man. You're stepping your game up. And I mean that.
And so to give some visual representations of this, this is the U.S. rent market as measured in Bitcoin. It is divided by Bitcoin here. What you see here, this red line, is that the price of rent in the United States is going down against Bitcoin. Bitcoin is forcing the price of rent to go down. Take gold, for example. The same thing here. Bitcoin versus gold. Gold is losing value against Bitcoin. Tesla stock is losing value against Bitcoin. The entire NASDAQ is losing value against Bitcoin. The S&P 500 is bleeding against Bitcoin. And the dollar especially takes the cake because it is the most open system. It is the system easiest to corrupt. It is the system easiest to create new infinite supply of. It is decreasing the fastest against Bitcoin. People think that, Bitcoin's going up and down in price, blah, blah, blah. But in reality, the dollar is bleeding against Bitcoin. And it's continued to for an extremely long period of time.
When you look at those charts, it's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And like you said, it's an open versus a closed system. Everything else in the world is open. The dollar, the stocks, to this, to that, it's all an open system. We have never in human history have transacted or been inside of a closed system before. Never. When you look at all those assets, when he said gold, he meant gold and silver too. They're all going down versus Bitcoin. If you make Bitcoin the denominator over a long period of time, forget about the charts going up and down, they go down against Bitcoin. How many Satoshis does it take to buy a house now? A lot less than it did 10 years ago. The thing is, we're so used to, in the old paradigm we were in, we're so used to measuring everything in our dollars, mostly the US dollars, our fiat currency. What we don't realize, if we just use Bitcoin as the denominator, everything would cost less. It'd be deflationary because it's a fixed, closed system. I've said it once and I'll say it 1,000 times. When I look to buy items that I want in the future or now, I don't look at how many dollars it will cost me, okay? I look at it at how many ounces of silver is going to cost me, this kind of silver, and also how many Satoshis it will take me to buy it.